They said the cameras never lie. But that night, inside the marble halls of the Johnsons' hotel, every camera captured something the board wasn't supposed to see. A billionaire CEO kneeling beside a sick child. A widowed father holding his breath, terrified. And a moment, just a moment, when Stephanie Johnson, the coldest businesswoman in the city, let her mask slip. Before we get into this story, make sure you're subscribed. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. This one is different. This one is real. And it begins on the night Stephanie fired a man just to see if he would break. His name was Edward Monday, a line cook, a bartender when the nights ran too long, and a father to a 6-year-old girl named Clara, the only piece of his heart he had left. But Stephanie didn't know any of that when she walked into the kitchen that morning. She didn't care. Strength, to her, meant survival. Cold, quiet, ruthless survival. A lesson carved into her by her father, Patrick Johnson, the legend who built the hotel empire and broke anyone who didn't meet his standard, including his own daughter. So when Stephanie gathered the staff around the stainless steel counters and pointed at Edward, her voice never trembled. "You're fired," she said. No explanation. No kindness. Justice. And in that moment, the test began. She watched him, studied him, waited for the anger, the shouting, the accusations. That's what most people did. But not Edward. He didn't fall apart. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply nodded, slowly, as if he had expected life to hit him again. As if life had hit him many times before. And when he spoke, his voice was steady. "All right," he whispered. "If this is what it has to be, I accept." Stephanie hated that. She hated his calmness, his dignity, his refusal to shatter. Because she didn't understand it. Not yet. That was the first crack in her world. The first moment she felt something she didn't like. Confusion. Why didn't he break? Why didn't he fight to stay? Why did he look at her as if he had more important things to worry about than losing his job? She didn't know that outside the hotel gates, Clara was waiting. She didn't know that Edward had promised her pancakes that night, or that every decision he made was not about him, but about the little girl who still woke up crying for her mother. Stephanie didn't know any of that, but she would, soon, because what she did next would change everything. She reinstated Edward quietly, watching from a distance as he worked. Every night, every shift, every struggle. Not because she cared, at least, that's what she told herself, but because something about him made her uneasy. A man who lost everything, yet never let it turn him cruel. A man with nothing, who still carried himself with quiet strength. A man who didn't fear her. And Stephanie Johnson was used to being feared. Both answers are coming. But first, the night everything began to shift. It happened after a neighbor was rushed to the hospital, leaving Edward with no one to watch Clara. He had no choice, either miss his shift and risk being fired for real, or bring her with him. Clara sat in the corner of the kitchen, sketching on a napkin, tiny legs swinging off a crate. Edward checked on her between orders, wiped her nose, tied her shoelaces, smiled at her like she was the last light in his world. He thought no one saw, but Stephanie did. She stood there in the doorway, her hand frozen on the frame, watching something she had never experienced herself. Care, warmth, love without conditions. It was the first time in years her heartbeat felt unfamiliar, and she didn't like it. Stephanie told herself she didn't care. But that night, she stayed longer than she should have, watching Edward balance a sizzling pan in one hand and Clara's sleepy head on his shoulder. Something about it unsettled her, not in a soft way, in a threatening way, because for the first time in years, she saw something she couldn't control. And Stephanie Johnson hated anything she couldn't control. She walked into her office with her father's voice echoing in her mind. Emotion is weakness. Attachments are distractions. A leader stands alone. She had lived by those words, carved her entire identity around them, built the Johnsons' hotel reputation on them. But then, Clara coughed. It echoed through the hallway, soft, but sharp enough to tear something open in Edward. He dropped everything, rushed to her side, lifted her into his arms like the world depended on her breathing. Stephanie stepped out. Just instinct or curiosity or something she refused to examine. Clara's forehead was burning, her eyes unfocused. Edward panicked quietly, the way only people who've survived too much know how to panic, silently, efficiently. "She's burning up," he whispered. "No buses at this hour. The clinics are closed." Stephanie didn't think. She just said it. "I'll drive you." Edward froze. Even Clara stared at her. And for the first time in a long time, Stephanie felt the unsettling sensation of being human. Minutes later, she was gripping the steering wheel, speeding through the city streets with Edward holding Clara in the back seat. Clara leaned against him, mumbling. Edward whispered soft promises to her. Stephanie listened. A father's voice filled with fear and love. Love so real it cracked her chest open. She had never heard anyone speak like that. Not to her. Not for her. At the hospital, Stephanie stayed. Not because she had to, but because walking away felt wrong in a way she couldn't name. Edward didn't leave Clara's side. He didn't sit, didn't rest, just held her hand until her breathing steadied and the doctor finally said the words he'd been dying to hear. She'll be okay. Relief washed over Edward so deeply he had to close his eyes. That moment, soft, fragile, hit Stephanie harder than anything she'd prepared for. And someone captured it. A nurse. A phone. A click. A picture of a billionaire CEO sitting beside a line cook and his daughter. A picture that would spiral into chaos. The photo hit the boardroom like a bomb. Rupert King, the loudest voice on the board, slammed the newspaper onto the table. This is unacceptable, Stephanie. Your image is not charity. It is power. She stared at the photo, her hand on Clara's shoulder. Edward looking exhausted, scared, and grateful. She didn't regret it. Not even a little. But the board didn't care. You will fire him, Rupert demanded. Immediately. Before this spreads. Her father's portrait hung behind them, watching, judging. Stephanie tried to stand her ground. No, she said. He didn't do anything wrong. Rupert leaned forward. Then you're unfit to lead this company. The room froze. That was the moment Stephanie realized something terrifying. Everything she had built, everything that was supposed to protect her, was now the weapon being used against her. She left the boardroom with a choice she didn't want to make. A choice between her position and her conscience. The next day, she called Edward into her office. His eyes were tired, uneasy, already sensing the storm. And Stephanie said the words she hated herself for. You need to take a leave for now. Both answers are coming. But the moment Edward heard those words, something inside him closed. He nodded. No anger. No argument. Just quiet disappointment. The kind that hurts more than rage. And he walked out of her office without looking back. Edward didn't come back the next day. Or the day after. His locker sat untouched. His apron hung exactly where he left it. And the kitchen felt wrong without him. Stephanie tried to focus on numbers, meetings, projections, anything that made sense. But every time she sat down, her mind replayed the moment he walked out. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. She hated how much it bothered her. Because it wasn't supposed to. People left her all the time. She built her life expecting it. But Edward's absence felt like a crack spreading through a foundation she thought was unbreakable. For days passed. For days of silence. For days of the board breathing down her neck. For days of her pretending she didn't miss the quiet strength of a man who never raised his voice, never broke under pressure, never stopped loving the little girl who needed him. On the fifth day, Stephanie snapped. No more board meetings. No more pretending. No more running from the thing clawing at her chest. She grabbed her keys, drove across the city, climbed the stairs to Edward's apartment with a heart pounding in ways she didn't understand. When he opened the door, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally, tired, guarded, done trying. Clara peeked from behind him, hugging a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Edward didn't invite her in, didn't smile, didn't soften, and Stephanie deserved that. I'm sorry, she said. No script, no rehearsed lines, just truth. Edward didn't respond. I didn't want to send you away, she continued. It wasn't my decision, but it was my failure. Still nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of disappointment, of betrayal, of questions he didn't want to ask because the answers already hurt. Then she said the thing he didn't expect. I want you back, she whispered. Not as a cook, not as a bartender, as the director of restaurant operations. His eyes lifted. Disbelief. Shock. Maybe a flicker of anger. I know what you are, Edward, she said softly. You're the man who keeps everyone else standing even when you're breaking. You're the kind of strength this hotel should have had years ago. Clara tugged on Edward's sleeve. Daddy, is she telling the truth? Stephanie didn't move, didn't breathe. Edward lowered his gaze to Clara, and in that moment, something changed. Because the decision was never about pride. It was about what kind of example he wanted to set for his daughter. Slowly, he stepped back from the door. An invitation. Stephanie entered quietly. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the heir. She wasn't Patrick Johnson's daughter. She was just a woman trying to fix the damage she caused. Edward listened as she explained everything. The board, the pressure, the legacy she was terrified to break. And when she finished, he finally spoke. "You tested me to see who I was," he said. His voice was calm, but edged with pain. "Now I know who you are." Those words cut deeper than anything the board had said, deeper than anything her father ever yelled, because they were true. And yet, he didn't turn her away again. Instead, he asked the question she didn't expect. What changed, Stephanie? She looked at Clara. Tiny, innocent, brave, and the answer fell out of her. She made me remember what strength really looks like. Edward studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow, heavy but real. He accepted the promotion. Not for himself. For Clara. For the future he wanted to build. For the dignity he refused to lose. When Stephanie left the apartment that night, she didn't feel powerful. She felt human. For the first time, that was enough. The board expected Stephanie to return obedient. To walk into the next meeting, bow to their demands, and pretend that nothing inside her had shifted. They were wrong. She entered the boardroom with Edward's acceptance still echoing in her mind, and with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Rupert King was already waiting. "We hope you've come to your senses," he said, tapping a file thick with printed gossip articles. "Your association with that employee." "Director," Stephanie corrected. Her tone didn't rise. It sharpened. Rupert's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Edward Monday is now the director of restaurant operations," she said calmly. "His contract is already signed." Silence fell like a dropped stone. One by one, the board members looked up, confused, irritated, startled. Rupert leaned back. "You're choosing an employee over the entire reputation of the Johnsons' hotel?" "No," she answered. "I'm choosing integrity." Rupert laughed. A cold, bitter sound. "Integrity doesn't run a global hotel empire." Stephanie stepped forward. "No," she said, "but fear doesn't run it either. And that's all we've been using." The room shifted. A few board members lowered their eyes. Others began whispering. Rupert clenched his jaw. "Your father would be ashamed." She didn't flinch. "Not this time." "My father built an empire," she said quietly. "But he destroyed a lot of people to do it. Including me." The room froze. It was the first time she had ever said those words out loud. The first time she admitted the truth that had shaped her entire life. "And I'm done repeating his mistakes." Rupert stood. "You're going to regret this." "No," she replied. "This company will thank me for it." He walked out, shaking his head, already planning his next attempt to undermine her. But the rest of the board stayed silent. Not opposing her. Not supporting her. Just watching something they had never seen before. A Johnson choosing humanity over power. Stephanie left the boardroom with her heart racing. Not in fear, but in freedom. Days later, she made her next decision. She transformed the unused rooftop into a quiet, green sanctuary for employees' children. A place where parents could bring their kids during long shifts. A place Clara visited often, her laughter echoing through the garden as she ran between the small lemon trees Stephanie planted herself. Edward stood beside her during the opening. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Sometimes he glanced at her with that same steady, unreadable expression, but softer now. Open in a way it hadn't been since the day she told him to take leave. And Stephanie felt something she never expected. Peace. Not comfort. Not control. Just peace. Weeks passed. The rooftop filled with color and noise and life. One afternoon, Clara tugged on Stephanie's sleeve. "You look happier now," she said, the simplicity of a child's honesty impossible to hide from. Stephanie knelt beside her. "I guess I am." "Why?" Clara asked. She looked at Edward, standing a few steps away, speaking to a team member, with the same quiet strength he had carried through every storm. "Because I finally understand something I should have learned a long time ago." Clara blinked. "What's that?" "That strength isn't about standing alone," Stephanie said softly. "It's about having someone worth standing for." Clara smiled. Bright, warm, pure. And in that moment, Stephanie realized something else. Something she didn't dare put into words yet. This wasn't just a rooftop garden. This wasn't just a shift in company culture. This was the beginning of something new. Something gentler. Something she never allowed herself to imagine. A different kind of family. not built on blood or legacy, but on choice, trust, and connection. The Johnsons' hotel didn't crumble when Stephanie broke her father's rules. It evolved, and so did she. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Edward joined them. Clara slipped her small hand into Stephanie's, as naturally as breathing. For the first time in her life, Stephanie didn't feel like she had to be strong alone. She simply felt human, and somehow, that was stronger than anything her father ever taught her.